We'll get started.
Okay.
Good. Laura, thanks for being here with me. I want to set a little context today. Laura and I were going to talk just to catch up and see how our first year with Positive Leadership went. And then I had this last minute idea. What if we recorded it and maybe other people could benefit from it? And then just like, I was so pleased with your response because you were like, oh yeah, that would have helped me. So why not do this for other people to see if it helps them? And so Laura Oblinger is the executive director of the Traverse City Area Chamber of Commerce. And this leadership program is one of their programs that they do. And Laura runs that and takes that going forward. So the purpose of this call is to talk a little bit about her experience in the first year with Positive Leadership. And she's getting ready to head into her second year. And so I like to say the first year is the learning curve year, and then the second year is the refining year. So I thought it'd be great to just hear about your experience and any thoughts. And I'm just going to throw questions at you. And you seem like somebody who can handle like anything that comes your way. So
We'll soon find out.
We'll find out. But I think the first thing is I just thought it'd be great to talk about your program a little bit so people can have a little background in that.
Sure. So the Chamber's Leadership Grand Traverse program has been in progress for more than 25 years. It is a pillar in not only for the Chamber, but it's a pillar in our community. So many of our local, like I'm sure with many chambers and their community leadership programs, so many of our local elected officials, our judges, our critical community leaders have come out of our Leadership Grand Traverse program, and they attribute the program to their inspiration to be a civic leader. So we have a very prestigious program. One thing that's unique with our program is we started it with the same model that almost everyone uses: 8-hour day sessions, an opening retreat, a closing retreat, a graduation. There's typically 7 to 8 day sessions with tracks like Education Day and State Government Day. And about 5 years ago, some of our applications were dwindling. The ability to get attendance for a full 8-hour day, as we do all of our programs, we were basically monitoring this program and identifying that it was having some dwindling impact to it. About 5 years ago, we reframed our entire Leadership Grand Traverse program. We've kept the foundation. It has tracks. It's Education Day. It's Arts and Culture Day. It's all. But there are 7 days. 6 day sessions, but they're 4-hour days. So our participants come in for a half a day. So it's a lot easier for us to have them come in and say, drop your phone in the basket, completely unplug for 4 hours versus 8 hours. That's been an ironic, very attractive piece to getting more participants in the program. It's been a much more effective program. As a result, it has allowed us to put out 2 programs a year versus 1 program a year. So from a chamber perspective, if you're listening to this, this has had a revenue impact to be able to put out 2 programs a year. And at the end of the day, we can say to our community, we're not putting out 25 Leadership Grand Traverse participants, we're putting out 50. And so we're building the pool at a more rapid pace than we ever have. And we have not had, we have to turn people away each application selection process. So all of that is to just clarify that this program is still a very important part of our community. It's an important part of the chamber. And it is actually one of our best programs and very much sought after.
Very good. Very exciting, too. It's just nice because I know programs go through this sort of waxing and waning cycle of their momentum, and then maybe something happens, change in leadership or change in society where people are like, I can't spend a whole 8-hour day focused. And then, you adjust and find new ways to innovate. And you get that resurgence. We actually have a model about this in the Positive Leadership book on resilience. We talk about the life cycle of organization, the entrepreneurial phase, the plateau, and then you reach this sort of like inflection point where you could either re-entrepreneur, reinvigorate, or you could descend into chaos.
Right.
Yeah, so you're in the upward cycle, and that's fantastic. So yeah, when you were, how did positive leadership factor into what you were trying to do? How did you hear about it, and then what was the deciding factor to go with it?
It's a great question, and one that I like to be able to answer because many of my peers can, I'm sure, relate to this. We get so many promotions for this chamber program, this chamber model, this particular service will increase your revenue, will be a member benefit, this will impact your leadership programming. Positive leadership was one of those many promotions that I got, and there was something about it. And so, Adam, I apologize, I can't put my finger on it, but something in your promotions couldn't leave. It was very intriguing to me, and I never quite kept ignoring your promotions. It kept coming back to me, and it was coming. I think it was just hitting me at a good time when we were doing really good in our Leadership Grand Traverse program. However, there was something missing. There was a thread that connected each day's session together missing, and there was professional development piece. It's one thing to nurture talent and send them out in your community to be a civic leader, and it's another thing to teach them how to go out and civically engage in a very positive and effective way. And so possibly that is why I couldn't let go of your promotions. And finally, I just sat down and I think contacted you and said, I need to know more about positive leadership. And I was sold from there, and your other testimonials and research that I did sold me on it. It's a palatable investment to be able to do it, and it solved a lot of those issues that we were having. Others may be able to relate to this as well, but there's a part of, with social media added into our life today and so many different ways to communicate, we find civically, a lot of civic leaders in our community and in media, people are getting, frankly, kind of mean and going, I don't know if unethical is the right term, but the way in which they lead, the process in which they go through, I think we've lost a sense of respect, and we've lost a sense of positive mindset. And so I can't deny that isn't a piece about your program that really intrigued me because of the chapters that you cover and the topics that you cover really get someone back to important human traits.
That's fantastic. And I love hearing that, of course, because that's really what I think part of, it's a very humanistic kind of model and approach to leadership. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I thought it'd be great. I know what people are really wanting to hear about. They're like, all right, so you made the decision to go with positive leadership. What did you do? How did you prepare? How did you take this whole thing and then kind of work it into your current program? And I think people would love to hear your experience with that.
Yeah, so another great question. And the reason that it's a great question, it was the one thing that kind of kept stopping me from I was a little overwhelmed with how do I get this into the program? We're all running a million miles a minute, and holy cow, I got the next class coming up, and I wasn't prepared to reinvent the curriculum. But so at first, if someone is looking at this and feeling a bit overwhelmed, that is normal. But I'll tell you that as soon as I stopped looking at it as a huge curriculum to add to leadership programming, I looked at it as really just in bite-sized chunks. How can I first introduce this at orientation? Look at the chapters. Where can I add this into the agenda within just 30 minutes? And I know, it'd be ideal to have an hour. It'd be ideal if this was an 8-hour day to maybe do 2 hours on a particular chapter. But how can I just kind of get this in on the surface? So you have conference calls that I sat in on a couple of those, and just listening to best practices helped a bit. Your introduction email chapter about implementing it was incredibly helpful. I literally just had to close the door and put everything aside and just go through the content and map it out. You can't do it trying to 5 minutes here in between meetings there, get it into your curriculum. You really do need to, because this is, I feel like if you don't do that, the impact of your content is so, it was a big deal for our class. And I don't, if I didn't take it seriously and literally just close the door, sit down and really map out exactly how am I going to incorporate this, I feel like it would have been not as impactful in the end. So organized process. I'd be happy to go through that process if you want as to where it fits in orientation. Would that help you in day sessions?
Yeah, I think people would love to hear that. And maybe too, just maybe jump to the end, or what was the impact that you noticed it had for your class, and then come back and then fill in. Yeah, good.
Well, that's the fun part, because in the end, I've been here 12 years, so I've seen, now that we put out a couple of years, I've seen almost 20 leadership Grand Traverse classes come out and graduate. They've all come out of our program connected with dynamic relationships built, but I have never seen one until this last class that had positive leadership incorporated into it. I had never seen one that had an emotional connection like I did with this. And there was only one difference, and it was that positive leadership was incorporated. When we talked about positive leadership, when we brought out the different tracks and chapters within each day session, you can't help but talk about personal experiences. And so we got really personal with each other. And so you can't help but create this very dynamic, a little bit deeper relationship with the participants. You with them and them with each other. By the time graduation came, I've never had such a tearful graduation. Literally, many of us brought to tears with the emotion of the bond that we created throughout the program. And again, the only difference was positive leadership was added. So if I go back into how did we do this? At orientation, where we have the class come in and we go through the binder, and we're not in a day session, and we're all meeting for the first time, and everyone's a stranger, essentially. I basically prepare them in advance by sending them your introduction chapter. In my email, I have a paragraph that says, I'm going to introduce you to a curriculum called Positive Leadership. It'll take up a portion of each of our day sessions. Attached is the introduction chapter to just get yourself familiar with what positive leadership is. That's in the email that gives them their agenda. We come to orientation, and because we're not connected yet, because we haven't gone through opening retreat, we're all strangers, I don't spend a ton of time, frankly, on it. However, I do talk to them about why positive leadership, and I take them to the end. We don't go into each particular chapter. I take them all the way to the end, and why are we incorporating it? And the primary message that I leave them with is that this is going to give them some professional development, but it's going to help them with some timeless human traits that are really going to impact every part of their life, professionally and personally. We have the opening retreat, and we only take about an hour out of our opening retreat. We do a skit, as suggested in some of your material, on each word. Mm-hmm. And then after the skit, we talk about it. So opening retreat, frankly, it's not a big part of the opening retreat. It didn't shake up what we usually do at opening retreat. It was just an extra hour that we found. Then we have our first day session, and this is consistent with every day session. Again, we have 6 day sessions, and there are 7 chapters, mm-hmm. right? So one of our day sessions doubles up. So what I ended up doing is I have a 4-hour day session, remember, so I only had 30 minutes max, and I put it in at the beginning. So from 8 to 8:30, they're required to arrive by 7:30 a.m. We start promptly at 8. From 8 to 8:30, it's positive leadership. But before we've gotten to the day session, a week in advance, I send them an email separate of their agenda, separate of the day session prep. So they get day session prep from their the chair of that day, and then they get a separate email from me on just positive leadership. So it's not cluttered with anything else. Mm-hmm. That prep email tells them the chapter we're going to talk about. It has my commentary as to what I take away from that chapter. It has some discussion questions to think about, and then it always has a video. And mm-hmm. in your resource section, you do provide some videos. I used some of yours, and I found some of my own. And then I let them know in advance that I'm not starting the discussion, they are. And so they get that about a week in advance. Of course, I attach the actual chapters in your chapter summaries. We get to the day session, and at 8 o'clock, boom, we start right on the topic. So resilient, what hit you in the chapter? We don't talk about the chapter. I just go right to assumption that you've read it. Start the conversation. What hit you? If there's more than 30 seconds in silence, I'm prepared with my own story. So then I go into my own story. That only had to happen for like the first 2 day sessions, and then they got in the swing of it, and they came with their own stories. The videos that I sent all were really compelling and related to that particular word in chapter. And so we spent actually a lot of time talking about the videos and how it related and connected to the particular word. And then we close the conversation and we move on with the day session. The last thing I would say about that is the other thing that I've done in advance is we have day chairs that plan our day sessions. The day chairs are also given the chapter in advance that's being studied on their day session, and I require them to weave it into their content. And those day chairs have not pushed back at all. It has not turned their world upside down, and they love it.
Oh, great.
So it doesn't stop just after our 30-minute conversation. It weaves in throughout their day. Finally, at closing retreat, I think gratitude is our last chapter that we talk about, and it's a great way to close it all up. And then we just connect the dots on we go from purpose to gratitude and all of them in between, and we kind of sit in a circle and just talk about positive leadership and how it impacted us. And I ask everyone for their story, what out of positive leadership impacted you the most? What chapter was most impactful? And then that's where some emotions came out. That's where, some folks said, I know every one of these traits, and I think I do all of them. I'm aware of all of them, but holy cow, am I really not being authentic with myself? And wow, I'm really good at being purposeful, and that came out as, that's a good thing. I'm going to do more of that. And some very emotional stories came out in that end, and that's where we wrapped it all together.
Wow. That's like so much and so valuable. I'm having one of those experiences where you're like, your expectations are like totally being like exceeded, because there's a lot in here. I thought maybe unpacking a couple of pieces might be useful. So what would be an example? You said you had like your little backup story. So you'd say, what hit you from the chapter? And then, to get things warmed up, if you needed it, you would share a story. Is there a story that you feel comfortable sharing, like related to any of the capacities that you think would be a good example?
One that I think was really interesting, it was the resilient chapter. And that was one where there was a really great video on that connected to resilience. And so we spent some time talking, but no one really had a personal story that they were willing to share. And the one that I had in my back pocket wasn't about me personally, but it was one that the whole community could relate to. And there was a time our mayor of our city was arrested for drunk driving. And it was an absolute rock bottom moment. It was a rock bottom moment for our community. It was a rock bottom moment for him. All of his dirty laundry was aired. But it was a very judgmental time. The community went nuts with name calling, and there was very little respect for what he was going through. Obviously had an illness that was not a proud moment for him. And he had a decision to make. And so I stopped with, reminding them, wasn't it that long ago that you all witnessed this. And I asked them to try and tell me the resilience story in that. And it took them a little while. And the moral of the story is he had an opportunity to step down. And he was being, hackled by the community to step down. But he made the choice as a community leader to apologize, put my head up high, address my problem, and continue on as mayor. Now, there was still a lot of judgment, but you cannot tell me that isn't resilience. There were many meetings, many events, many ribbon cuttings, many places that man had to go where the whole town knew his dirty laundry. And he walked in with his head high, and he continued to be the mayor. Was he always perfect? No, but he got back up and he kept going. That, judge it however you want, at the end of the day, that was a resilient example. And so that's a sort of an example that I always try and come. It might be mine personally, but it might be something that everyone can relate to that happened in our community that really makes that word hit home.
I really like that because I think a lot of times I'll explain that you should share your personal story. And that's not true. Like, this is a great story that everyone can relate to. It doesn't have to be a personal story, just something that relates. And I think people hearing this, that might give them a little relief to say, well, gosh, I don't have any real stories I could think of for myself. So it just expands that field of possibilities for how you can weave this into the program. So once you ask that question, all right, what hit you in the chapter? I'm wondering if were there some people that clearly didn't read the chapter and were winging it, but then maybe they started to read it more? Or, did it matter whether they read the chapters or not? Or just overall, what ends up happening once you say, okay, tell me what hit you?
Yeah. There were a few chosen that didn't read the full chapter for sure. They might have read it 3 of the 6-day sessions or none of the 6-day sessions. That's why I really liked the variety of action that I was able to give them. You've got the full chapter, and you can read it in its entirety, and you can really connect to it. You've got the chapter summary that you can skim and come pretty prepared, and it'll trigger something in your mind for discussion. And at the very minimum, you can watch anywhere from a 30-second to a 5-minute video and get the concept of purpose, gratitude, resilience, authenticity. So you could come in and only have watched the video and still been able to participate in the discussion. My goal was not take the time and read the full chapter. My goal was to come in and understand the concept of a particular word and participate in the discussion and somehow walk away from the discussion with an impact on you. So not everyone read the full chapter, but there were different outlets to be able to use to be able to still participate, even if you were the one that only had 30 seconds.
Yeah, that's fantastic. A couple things. One, in the resource library, there are, and I'll continually add resources, videos, and I don't want to overwhelm with options, but I want you to pick out the things that you think would be relevant. And I love that you had other videos that weren't on the resource library that you used. And I also made a little note to ask you, I'd love to see them so I can include them in the resource library.
Yeah, I will send you each one of the videos that I used.
That's great. I'd love that. You mentioned the chapter summaries. There's new ones up that match the new chapters. Those just today's September 10th, those were just put up last week. So if you were looking at they're now 2 pages, but still, it's short and really, really good. I had an intern do it, and she did a fantastic job with summarizing the chapters. I mean, it's so helpful to hear other people's thoughts on positive leadership and what it means to them. And so for her to do this was really great. And then the other thing is, have you used the field guides at all? That's a new thing Yeah.
The things I didn't use, and it's not because they weren't relevant, I just didn't use them, were the field guides, and I did not use the PowerPoints. But they were, I felt like there was a tipping point where it's like, I sent them lots of, a few different avenues to be able to dig into the chapters, the content, but then didn't want to overwhelm it. And my prep, so to the point much earlier about, how do I dig into this? And this can be overwhelming to think about how to incorporate it into my curriculum. You can go to the extreme of using all of that and preparing to that full extent and having this an hour. I can easily spend 2 hours on one of your chapters in a discussion. But if need be, I think you can still have the impact of your program without using some of that stuff.
That's good. Good. I totally agree with that. These are just options and resources to draw from. So I love that. And one of my favorite quotes is, plans are useless. I think this is General Eisenhower quote. Plans are useless, but planning is essential. That the act of preparing, maybe look at the PowerPoint, read the chapter, look at the field guide, do what you said, close the door, really give it some attention, some thought, so that you can personally relate to the material. And then when you're ready to have the process happen live with the participants, it just probably goes by so much faster than anybody ever realized. Yeah. So quick things. How did those 30 minutes go? Was it one of those, did you leave them wanting more? And the other question is, what did your preparation do for you? Like, how did you connect to the material? And how did that help, if it did?
Yeah, that is a question that I think feeds right into my new love for this program, is because I personally grew from this. Now, I've been through it. That was my first time, but it forced me to really think about my leadership traits, and how am I purposeful and how am I authentic and resilient. And so as a facilitator of it, I think it showed to the participants the genuine, because I could relate to it myself. I certainly was not immune to any of the content. And I was able to come up with my own stories or stories from within the community that related to a particular chapter. So my personal experience was that this was a growing period for me too. It was a real learning opportunity. We also are bringing it into our staff. I'm going to go through the particular chapters internally here. I mean, again, I go back to, you might have had this, I think, somewhere within your content, and it's the best way, I think, to just summarize what is positive leadership. It's timeless human traits that you cannot go wrong with. And so, so as I went through that, in every chapter I looked at, and whenever I prepped for it and thought about examples and looked for the perfect video, I kept thinking to that myself, is that these are personal traits that I can't wait to get back to. And it fostered a conversation, a common thread, no matter what the topic was: gratitude, authenticity. The common thread in every one of them was, we need to get back to positive leadership. I mean, you've done a great job, branding all of this. That's what it all rolls up to, is we need to get back. And boy, I want to be the one that starts leading by example in a board meeting, in some sort of a meeting that shows, I'm going to stand up. I'm going to be authentic. I'm going to be purposeful. I'm going to have gratitude towards the others around the table. I'm going to really sponsor this. And that's what I heard from others. The common thread, no matter what the chapter was, is that I can't wait to start doing more of this, so other people start doing more of it. And we need to get back to more of a positive leadership in our community.
That's fantastic. Like, you're getting me excited about, I've been working with this for a while and developing content, but now, like, reinvigorates me. What about the concepts in the introduction, which I think I want to change it to the foundation chapter, because it's not just an introduction. I feel like the capacities are very important, and they stand alone, and they're on their own, they're worthy and interesting and valuable. But but I think what really accentuates them is when you think about it through the lens of social force. But I know that for me, I know that must be a strange idea, or I imagine it's a strange idea for people to hear that leadership isn't a title or a role. It's not a trait. And then I'm describing it as this social force, that it's not inside a person, it's between people, and it's fluid. In one moment, you might take actions that evoke reactions from me. And so it all makes sense in my head. And I'm just really curious how that played with your group, if it was even a topic that came up, or just any thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, I think it goes back to some of the other things that I was saying, is that this was very relatable content to everyone in the room. The quietest person in the room could contribute and relate to how this information can make them better. And not only how it can make them better, but how it can spread that vibe amongst the group within what they're in. And so I don't know if I'm specifically answering your question.
Well, yeah, I mean, like I talk about leadership as not a trait or a position, that it's a social force. And so I use that term, and I just didn't know, like, if that's a little too esoteric for people, like, oh, what does he mean by social force?
No, because again, you know, when you really get into being a leader, it isn't always it is a social force. It is not always by right of title. It's by right of influence and participation, and you could be if it's within an organization, you could be on the administrative team and still be a leader. And it's the leader traits don't always come from the top executive. The leader trait doesn't always come from the chairman of the board, the mayor of the city. So I believe the content starts to get people to really, and that's what I felt, is that they were really thinking about leadership differently, that it doesn't matter where you are on the pecking order that entitles you to leader. It's how you lead that creates you as a leader. And there was one in particular chapter, and I am not going to be able to remember which one it was, but there was one of the videos that I found was a leader is always is not as good until the first follower, you know. So it takes a movement. This might have been in the community building that I connected this video to. A movement really comes from the first follower. And, you know, I think all of that starts to get to what your point is, and I validate your point that it is a social issue. It is not just by title or right that you're are you an entitled leader? No, you need to lead by example.
Good, very good. Couple things. One is, if somebody watching this, and like I said, it's just really going to be the people who might be wanting to start positive leadership and kind of learn from your example. If they did have questions, like maybe I didn't ask something that I should have, are you okay with them emailing you?
Absolutely, absolutely. Because I want to do as much as I can to support your efforts to get this content out there, because I really believe the content in itself, if we can start, we have the foundation of encouraging and inspiring people to be civic leaders within our community. Your content helps them on how to do it. It's one thing for us to lead them to the water, but it is another thing to help them lead in a way that creates movement, and lead in a way that starts shifting the society to a more respectful society. And I don't care what town you're in, think we've all lost a piece of that. And I believe that is why this has been such a great experience for our program, is because this content allowed us to connect it to that respect issue, the positive issue, that it does come down to how you lead as an individual and your traits. Long-winded answer, yes, email me and call me with questions, because I want your content out there more and more, because I do believe it can start to shift some of the negative arena that all of our societies have started to get into.
And I'm glad for your quote unquote long-winded answer, because it just brings purpose to the forefront. You know, for me, I loathe self-promotion. I'm bad at it, and I resent it if I ever being in a situation where I have to do it. But here I don't mind promoting this idea because of the purpose behind it. What you do, what every community leadership program does, is create a pipeline for people who are trying to make their communities better. And that's what drives me. If I tried to imagine Tulsa without Leadership Tulsa and all the graduates that are out there serving on boards, getting involved in things, it would be a lesser version of the community than it is now. And I know that's true for Traverse City, for other programs that use positive leadership, any program that has a community leadership program.
Right.
Now, if positive leadership is contributing to that, then that makes me even more excited. If it's fueling people with ways to think about leadership that aren't these immutable laws or these things that make it sound a bit like it's about status or whatever, then that's really what excites me about this. So that's great. And I wanted to kind of move toward wrap up, just out of respect for your time. But I wanted to hear your thoughts on, now that you have the first year underneath, are there any tips or lessons learned? And then the next thing I would ask is, what are your thoughts for going into year 2? What might you do differently, or if anything?
Yeah, I'm not going to do a lot differently. It was incredibly successful, and I don't really want to mess with that, to be frank. It fit in really nicely with our curriculum and our agendas. The only thing that I would like to do differently is, I feel like the kickoff at orientation, getting them introduced to each word, somehow, and it's nowhere within your instruction. It was just somehow within how it was a little clunky, even though it didn't take long, and even though we had great discussion about all of them. I have a little bit of refinement to do at orientation as to how do we introduce all of the words that we're going to study, and connect it to what's going on at opening retreat. But that is so tiny. I wish I had a list for you of lessons learned, but the lessons learned is I'm going to do it almost exactly like I did first time, because I got what I had hoped for plus some.
That's
so
great.
I'm not sure. With that said, there's no reason for me to change it up.
Sure. And then tips for people, like now that, do you feel like you had to go through that first year and maybe with some uncertainty, maybe with okay, I don't know this material, like I don't feel like I'm an expert in it yet, but it comes, and you just got to work through the first year, and that first year is the learning curve. Anything about that experience that you could pass along to anybody else?
The first tip I would provide is just close the door and do it. Figure it out. Don't try and make this bigger than it is. If I realized it's really not climbing the mountain that I thought it was, it's just a tiny little, in the end, it's a lot of content because it's not delivered to you, in a book. It is all online, and sometimes that can be overwhelming. So where do I start with all of this? Just start, just close the door, sit down, have some quiet time, and just get it started. Just put it in for half an hour. Do something that makes it easy to digest for you. Just get started. Don't delay. If you're thinking about this, don't delay, because I'm here to tell you that it had a major impact, not on the success of our program, but on developing people that are going to lead in our community. That's my goal, not making our program better. It's advancing the people and nurturing their talent. So just do it, and do it in a way that is really simple at first. Don't make it bigger than it is. The second thing that I would say is there were some suggestions, find a facilitator if it's not you who is organizing the program. This needs to come from, I'm not a professional facilitator. I don't think this could have been as dynamic, and I don't think I could have built a relationship I did with these participants if this didn't come from me. This needs to come from the chamber executive that is staffing this program. Because there's that added value of this builds your connection with these people, because you're sharing your personal stories with them too. And so, and you are a leader. If you're running a chamber, you're a community leader, and you can learn from this too. And the best way to do it is to actually be the facilitator.
Yeah.
So,
I love that. And, for some programs, they do have a facilitator who doesn't, maybe they're not a chamber program, maybe they're a standalone program. Maybe it's not the director who runs the program. Maybe it's a team member. So really, though, that privilege of facilitating has a kind of price of admission. And I think to be successful, that price of admission is exactly what you said. To connect to the material personally. I just think that that's the number one success factor for this is if you connect to it personally. If you can't connect to it personally, then maybe this isn't the right curriculum for you, right? Or maybe your role as facilitator may not be that may not be the best role to play. One of those options. But if you can personally connect to the material, I just think it's going to resonate and be successful.
I would completely agree.
Good. Very good. Yes. So, wow. Well, this has been so seriously just incredibly valuable, because I don't do what you do. And so, but I get a lot of questions and conversations, and I share those tidbits because I talk to a lot of people who are implementing positive leadership and have that experience. And I also am pretty familiar with the material. And I am a facilitator. I've been doing that for almost 20 years. So I do add some value, but what really adds value is someone in your position who's walking this journey and doing it. And so just so incredibly valuable and generous of you to want to help other people get the most out of it. So I can't thank you enough.
It's my pleasure. As I said, it's fantastic content, and if anyone's sitting on the fence here, stop delaying, just make it happen, and I'm happy to help, because I am fully confident from experience this will change our civic leaders.
Very good. All right, well, I'm going to stop the session there, the recording of it, and again, thanks again for doing this.
Thank you.